The conference room felt smaller than usual with 3 people staring at me across the table. I'd been called to what HR termed a routine compliance meeting, but the atmosphere was anything but routine. Michael Torres, my CEO, sat with his hands folded, his expression unnervingly calm. Beside him, the head of HR clutched a folder, and our legal counsel tapped a pen nervously against her notepad. "Olivia," Michael began, his voice measured, "we've discovered some serious irregularities in our financial accounts." My stomach dropped, but I tried to stay professional. "What kind of irregularities?" Instead of answering, Michael slid a stack of documents across the polished table. I picked them up with shaking hands. Bank transfers, offshore account statements, wire transfer receipts. Every single document bore my digital signature. "These transactions total over $3 million, Michael continued, watching me closely. "All unauthorized, all traced back to accounts opened in your name." I stared at the papers, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. My signature was there, yes, but I'd never seen these accounts, never authorized these transfers. "This isn't possible," I whispered. "I didn't do this." "The evidence suggests otherwise," the legal counsel said coldly. This wasn't a meeting. It was an ambush. I'd been cornered, accused, and judged before I'd even walked through the door. HR stood up, her face carefully neutral. "Security will escort you out. You're terminated effective immediately." As 2 security guards appeared at the door, I looked at Michael. He met my eyes with something that looked almost like satisfaction. How did it come to this? The walk through the office was a blur of shame and disbelief. Cameras from the lobby security system tracked my movement, and I was acutely aware that this footage would be reviewed, dissected, maybe even leaked. Coworkers I'd worked alongside for 6 years suddenly found their computer screens fascinating. Nobody made eye contact. Nobody asked what was happening. They already knew or thought they knew. The whispers started before I even reached the elevator. I heard fragments. "Embezzlement always seemed so nice. You never really know people." A junior accountant I'd mentored for 2 years, teaching her everything I knew about financial analysis, turned her back completely when I walked past. That hurt more than the accusations. They'd already decided who I was. Not Olivia Hart, the analyst who'd helped triple the company's efficiency. Not Olivia, who stayed late to help colleagues meet deadlines. Just Olivia the thief. The elevator doors opened. I stepped inside, clutching the cardboard box with my desk belongings, a coffee mug, a photo of my parents, a plant I'd kept alive for 3 years. As the doors began to close, I looked up one last time. Michael stood on the mezzanine overlooking the lobby, his arms crossed, watching me leave. And he was smiling, not broadly, just a faint upturn of his lips that made my blood run cold. He'd planned this, every moment of it. The elevator descended, and with it, my entire life seemed to fall away. Everything I'd built, gone in 20 minutes. The news broke before I even made it home. My phone started buzzing incessantly while I sat in traffic, still numb from shock. Text messages, emails, missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize. I finally pulled over and checked the notifications. The headline on the local business news site read, "Top financial analyst resigns amid fraud probe at Tech Vision Solutions." Resigns? They didn't even have the honesty to say I was fired. The article was vague but damaging, using phrases like alleged financial misconduct and under investigation for embezzlement. My name appeared 6 times. Michael's name appeared once in a quote. "We take these allegations extremely seriously and are cooperating fully with authorities to ensure accountability." My mother called, her voice breaking through tears. "Olivia, what's happening? The neighbors are asking me about the news. They're saying you stole money." "Mom, I didn't do anything. I was framed." But even as I said it, I heard how it sounded. Exactly what a guilty person would say. By evening, Tech Vision had released an official statement. Carefully worded by lawyers, it implied guilt without directly stating it. Phrases like regrettable situation and breach of trust painted me as someone who'd betrayed the company's confidence. I hadn't even seen a police report yet. Hadn't been formally charged with anything. But in the court of public opinion, I'd already been tried and convicted. 3 days later, an official subpoena arrived at my apartment. The FBI wanted to talk to me about financial crimes. I held the document with shaking hands, realizing that this nightmare was just beginning. My name is Olivia Hart. I'm 32 years old, and until 3 weeks ago, I was a senior financial analyst at Tech Vision Solutions. I'd worked there for 6 years, starting as a junior analyst fresh out of graduate school, and working my way up through obsessive attention to detail and countless late nights. I was known for rebuilding broken financial systems and mentoring new hires. I made complicated spreadsheets comprehensible. I caught errors others missed. I'd trusted Michael Torres completely. He'd hired me personally, promoted me twice, and publicly praised my work at company meetings. I'd even defended him once when the board questioned his aggressive expansion strategy, using my analysis to support his vision. Looking back now, I saw how carefully he'd positioned me, how he'd made sure I had access to high-level financial systems, how he'd praised my digital signature protocols as efficient, how he'd encouraged me to streamline authorization processes. He taught me everything, including how to cover your tracks. He'd just been covering his tracks with my name. I sat in my apartment, the lease was up in 2 months, and I had no idea how I'd pay rent, and made a decision. I could run, change my name, move to another state, start over, or I could fight. I didn't have money for a lawyer, didn't have powerful friends, didn't even have a job anymore. But I had something they didn't expect. I was innocent, and innocent people fight differently than guilty ones. They fight with truth. The corporate attorney came recommended by a former colleague who felt guilty enough to at least point me toward legal help. His office was modest, his suit slightly worn. He listened to my story with sympathetic eyes that I initially mistook for belief. "The evidence is substantial," he said after I finished. "Multiple transactions, your signature, accounts in your name." "Forged signatures," I corrected. "Someone used my credentials." He shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Olivia, proving forgery is incredibly difficult, especially with digital signatures. And Michael Torres has significant connections. The board, the mayor, several judges." My hands gripped the armrests. "So you're saying I should just give up?" "I'm saying you should consider a plea deal. Admit to partial responsibility, claim you were coerced or made mistakes under pressure. The prosecution might offer reduced charges. It'll be easier if you just admit some level of guilt." I stared at him, understanding dawning. He wasn't here to defend me. He was here to make this go away quietly. To protect Michael's powerful friends by convincing me to accept blame I didn't deserve. "You're afraid of him," I said. The attorney looked away. "I'm being practical. You're up against someone with resources you can't match." I stood up, grabbing my bag. "Then I'll defend myself." As I walked out, I heard him mutter something about foolish idealism. But I wasn't being idealistic. I was being desperate. And desperate people find strength they didn't know they had. 2 months after my firing, I was evicted from my apartment. My savings, never substantial, had evaporated paying for basics while I searched for work that would never come. Nobody would hire someone under investigation for embezzlement. I moved into a studio apartment in a rough neighborhood, the kind of place I'd driven past without really seeing before. The walls were thin. The heating barely worked. But it was all I could afford with my dwindling funds and the part-time cafe job I'd managed to get under a fake last name. I sat on my second-hand couch one evening, drinking wine from a coffee mug because I'd sold my glassware, scrolling through online comments about my case. She seemed so trustworthy. Just shows you can't judge people. Stealing from a company that gave her opportunities. Disgusting. Hope she goes to jail for a long time. I thought rock bottom was a place, something you could identify and measure. But it's not a place. It's a sound. The silence when no one believes you. The absence of support, of friendship, of basic human trust. That night, staring at my cracked ceiling, I almost gave up. Almost called the attorney back and took whatever plea deal he could arrange. Then my phone pinged with a notification, an encrypted message from an anonymous sender. No name, just a string of numbers. The message was brief. "You were set up. Check the Cayman filings. Look for your name. Delete this message after reading." My heart pounded. I read it 3 times before my shaking fingers deleted it. Someone believed me. Someone was helping. I didn't know who or why, but suddenly the silence didn't feel quite so absolute. I spent the next week figuring out how to access offshore account filings without leaving a digital trail. I used the library's computers, changing locations daily. I created dummy email accounts. I followed the anonymous tip to a database of registered business entities in the Cayman Islands. The search took hours, cross-referencing corporate filings and financial disclosures. Then I found it. A document listing shell companies registered in the last 3 years. One name appeared repeatedly across multiple accounts. Hart, my name, my initials. But accounts I'd never opened in a place I'd never been. I downloaded everything, my hands shaking so badly I could barely control the mouse. The files were encrypted, but the headers showed registration dates, account numbers, and transaction summaries. Every account had been opened using my personal information: my social security number, my birth date, my home address. But the IP addresses for the registrations, they all traced back to TechVision Solutions' corporate network, specifically to the executive suite. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Michael hadn't just framed me for embezzlement. He'd used my identity to create an entire offshore network for moving his stolen money. I was the shell company, the front, the scapegoat. If anyone investigated, they'd find my name on everything while Michael stayed clean. I copied the files to a flash drive, then deleted my browser history and search records. As I walked out of the library, I whispered to the cold afternoon air, "If this is real, he's using me to move his money. And that means there's a trail." Paranoia became my constant companion. I hid the flash drive in a hollowed-out book, then second-guessed the location and moved it to a taped compartment under my bathroom sink. I checked my apartment locks twice before bed. I deleted my social media accounts completely. I stopped using my regular phone and bought a cheap burner at a corner store, paying cash. Every sound in the hallway made me jump. Every unfamiliar car parked outside my building seemed suspicious. Was I being watched? Had Michael realized I was digging into his crimes? The weight of the evidence I'd discovered pressed down on me. I had proof, but what could I do with it? If I went to the police, they'd arrest me based on the existing warrants and accusations. If I went public, Michael's lawyers would bury me. I needed someone I could trust, someone who knew the company's systems, someone loyal enough to help despite the risks. I had one option, though it terrified me to involve anyone else in this nightmare. I pulled out my burner phone and dialed a number I'd memorized but never thought I'd use for something like this. "Hello?" The voice was young, uncertain. "Devin, it's Olivia. Don't hang up. I need your help and I need you to trust me." Silence. Then quietly, "I wondered when you'd call." The line stayed open. I took a breath and began explaining what I'd found, hoping I wasn't making the biggest mistake of my life. We met in a parking lot behind a closed shopping center, the kind of location that felt simultaneously safe and deeply suspicious. Devin arrived in his old Honda, looking over his shoulder nervously before getting into my car. He was 24, a former intern I'd trained who'd been kept on as a junior analyst. Loyal, smart, and terrified. "I don't have much time," he said. "If anyone sees me with you." "I know, I'm sorry to drag you into this." "You didn't drag me," I volunteered. He pulled out his own flash drive. "The week you were accused, Michael asked me to clean the shared drives, said we were doing routine digital housekeeping. I was supposed to delete archived files from your access period." "Did you?" I asked, my stomach sinking. "I started to, but something felt wrong about the timing, so I made copies first, recovered fragments of files from the recycle bin and backup servers." He handed me the drive. "These are financial transfers dated after you were already fired, Olivia. Wire transfers from offshore accounts to domestic ones, all using authorization codes that only executives have access to." I stared at the drive in my shaking hand. "Devin, this is evidence that you couldn't have made these transactions because you didn't work there anymore," he finished. "But it's more than that. Look at the account names." I plugged his drive into my laptop, opening the recovered files. My eyes widened. Every account was registered to some variation of my name or information. "You're not just framed," Devin said quietly. "You're the shell company. He's been using your identity to move money for years, probably since you joined the company. You were never supposed to find out. You were just supposed to take the fall when it all came out." I closed my laptop, my mind racing. Michael hadn't just betrayed me. He'd been systematically stealing and using me as cover for 6 years. The following weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and obsessive investigation. I barely ate, barely left my apartment except for my cafe shifts. My world narrowed to spreadsheets, timelines, and transaction records. I cross-referenced Devin's recovered files with the Cayman documents. I built a comprehensive timeline showing when accounts were opened, when transfers occurred, and where the money went. Every trail led back to the same source, Michael's assistant's computer. The digital fingerprints were subtle but unmistakable. Login times that matched Michael's known schedule. IP addresses from his executive office. Even the language in transaction memos matched his writing style. I'd edited enough of his correspondence to recognize his patterns. But I had a problem. The FBI already thought I was guilty. The evidence pointing at me was substantial and official. My evidence was circumstantial, gathered through questionable means, and would require technical expertise to authenticate. They'd never believe me if I just walked in and claimed innocence. I needed to force them to look, to make my evidence impossible to ignore. I spent 3 days crafting an anonymous tip. It had to be detailed enough to be taken seriously, but vague enough not to immediately identify me as the source. I printed everything at different library branches, using public computers. I mailed it from a post office in a different zip code. The package went to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, addressed to no one specific, with a note typed on plain paper. TechVision Solutions CEO Michael Tors is using employee identities to operate offshore money laundering accounts. Enclosed evidence shows discrepancies in transaction timelines and authorization protocols. Recommend investigation of Cayman accounts under names Hart, O, and derivatives. Then I waited. Weeks passed with no response. Michael posted on LinkedIn about company growth and ethical leadership. I spiraled into doubt and loneliness, wondering if I'd wasted my last chance. Then, on a Tuesday morning, my burner phone rang. Unknown number. I stared at the phone for 3 rings before answering. Hello, is this Olivia Hart? A male voice, professional, careful. Who's asking? My name is Agent Reeves. I'm with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. We received some interesting documents about TechVision Solutions. Documents with very specific allegations about offshore accounts. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. I don't know what you're talking about. Ms. Hart, I'm not recording this call, and I'm not trying to trap you. I'm calling because the information we received raises questions about the case against you. Questions that need answers. I sat down on my couch, my legs suddenly weak. What kind of questions? The kind that involve transaction dates that don't match your employment timeline. The kind that suggest your digital credentials were used after you were terminated. The kind that make me wonder if we're prosecuting the wrong person. For the first time in months, I let myself hope. Where did you get these files, Ms. Hart? Agent Reeves asked. I hesitated. Admitting I'd sent them was essentially confessing to hacking and unauthorized access, but denying it seemed pointless when he clearly knew. Let's just say I know who really signed those documents, I said carefully. A long pause. Then don't delete anything. Keep every file, every record, every piece of evidence you have. And don't contact Michael Tors under any circumstances. If he knows you're investigating him, you could be in danger. Understood. One more thing, Agent Reeves added. If you have more evidence, send it now. We're opening a formal investigation, but we need everything you've got. After he hung up, I sat in stunned silence. Someone believed me. Someone with authority was actually listening. For the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't facing it alone. I spent 2 days organizing every file, every document, every piece of evidence I'd collected. I made encrypted backups and stored them in multiple locations. Then I compiled everything into a comprehensive package with detailed notes explaining how each piece connected to the others. I was about to send it when someone knocked on my apartment door. Loud, assertive knocking. My breath caught. Nobody visited me anymore. I approached the door cautiously, checking the peephole. Michael Tors stood in my dingy apartment hallway, looking completely out of place in his expensive suit. My first instinct was to not answer, to hide and hope he'd leave. But Agent Reeves's warning echoed in my mind. Don't contact him. He was contacting me, which meant either he didn't know I was investigating or he was here to intimidate me into stopping. I took a breath and opened the door. Michael, this is unexpected. Olivia. He smiled, that same cold smile from the mezzanine. I hope I'm not interrupting. I wanted to speak with you privately. Every instinct screamed danger, but refusing to talk might make him suspicious. I stepped aside, letting him in. He looked around my apartment with barely concealed disdain. I came to make peace, he said, which was obviously a lie. The company is willing to offer you a settlement, a sum of money in exchange for signing an NDA about your employment and termination. How much? I asked, keeping my voice steady despite my rage. 50,000, enough to start over somewhere new. All you have to do is sign an agreement that you won't discuss the circumstances of your departure or make any further claims against TechVision Solutions. It was hush money. He was trying to buy my silence. Why would you do that? I asked. Michael's eyes scanned my apartment, lingering on my laptop, my desk. He was searching for something for evidence that I was investigating him. "Because despite everything, I respected your work," he said smoothly. "This whole situation is unfortunate. I'd like to help you move forward." I watched him carefully. "Be careful what stories you tell, Olivia," he added, his tone shifting slightly. "Some stories sound believable until people start asking questions, and questions lead to investigations that might implicate you further." It was a threat, thinly veiled as advice. He suspected something. Maybe not the full extent of my investigation, but enough to worry him. "I'll think about your offer," I said. After he left, I realized my hands were shaking, but not from fear, from the knowledge that I'd just had a conversation that might be my most powerful evidence yet. The moment Michael left, I checked my coat pocket. The small digital recorder I'd placed there before opening the door had captured everything. I'd started carrying it after Agent Reeves's warning, a cheap device from an electronics store that could hold hours of audio. Michael's words played back clearly. His offer, his thinly veiled threat, his comment about investigations that might implicate me further. It wasn't a confession, but it was damning. Why would an innocent CEO offer settlement money to someone he'd accused of embezzlement? Why warn them about telling stories unless those stories were true? I uploaded the audio file immediately, creating multiple backups. Then I transcribed the entire conversation, noting tone, context, and implied threats. Before I could second-guess myself, I sent everything to Agent Reeves's secure email address. His response came within an hour. "Received. This is significant. We'll use it. Stay safe, and remember, don't engage with him again." That recording became my lifeline, proof that Michael was worried enough about my version of events to try silencing me. For once, I had leverage. I kept the original recorder in my bag at all times, a security blanket that represented the first piece of evidence I'd gathered on my own terms. The next few weeks were agonizing. Agent Reeves stopped responding to my emails, which I assumed meant the investigation had gone dark, either progressing so well they couldn't risk communication or abandoned completely. I worked my cafe shifts, came home to my cramped apartment, and tried to imagine a future beyond this nightmare. Then one morning, Devin called my burner phone. His voice was breathless, excited. "Turn on the news, right now, Channel 7. I fumbled for my remote. The company's offices were just raided. FBI. They've got warrants for everything. The news footage showed federal agents swarming Tech Vision Solutions' downtown headquarters. Boxes of documents being carried out. Computer servers being seized. Employees standing on the sidewalk looking confused and frightened. And there, in the center of the chaos, Michael Torres being escorted to a waiting car. Not handcuffed yet, but flanked by agents who weren't taking no for an answer. The news anchor's voice narrated over the footage. "FBI agents raided the offices of Tech Vision Solutions this morning in connection with an ongoing financial crimes investigation. Sources say the probe centers on allegations of money laundering and fraud involving offshore accounts." My hands shook as I gripped my coffee mug. This was really happening. The investigation was real. They'd taken my evidence seriously enough to raid his company. Then the anchor continued. "The investigation reportedly began after a former employee, previously accused of embezzlement, came forward with additional evidence. Sources close to the case identify Olivia Hart as a cooperating witness in the federal probe." My phone exploded with notifications. Text messages from former colleagues. Friend requests from journalists. My name was public again, but this time with a different context. Cooperating witness. Not victim. Not exonerated. Just someone who'd given information to investigators. I didn't know if that was better or worse. The news cycle would connect me to Michael forever, regardless of the outcome. My reputation would always carry the shadow of this scandal. But at least now, I wasn't facing it alone. At least now, people were questioning whether the narrative they'd been told was actually true. I watched the footage repeat, watching Michael's carefully controlled expression crack slightly as he was guided into the federal vehicle. He'd built an empire on lies, and I'd been the one to start pulling threads until it all unraveled. Agent Reeves called me directly the day after the raid. "We need you to come in for formal questioning. Everything you've told us needs to be on the record now." I met him at the FBI field office, a bland government building that smelled like coffee and tense professionalism. The interrogation room was smaller than I expected, with a metal table, uncomfortable chairs, and a mirror I assumed was two-way glass. For 6 hours, I told them everything, every detail of my time at Tech Vision. Every transaction I'd traced, every file Devon had recovered, every moment of the investigation I'd conducted alone in my apartment while the world thought I was guilty. Agent Reeves sat across from me with another investigator, a woman named Agent Kim. They asked questions I'd already answered and questions I hadn't anticipated. They pushed on inconsistencies, tested my timeline, and verified my technical knowledge. Finally, Agent Reeves slid the recorder across the table, the one that had captured my conversation with Michael. "This recording," he said, "combined with the financial evidence you provided and the files we seized during the raid, gives us everything we need. Michael Torres used your identity to create a network of shell companies for moving money stolen from Tech Vision's accounts. He was embezzling from his own company and using you as cover. Will I still face charges?" I asked, the question I'd been terrified to voice. "No, the prosecutor is dropping all charges against you. You're officially a witness, not a suspect." I started crying then, not delicate tears, but deep, shaking sobs of relief that I couldn't control. Agent Kim handed me tissues and waited patiently until I could breathe again. "You'll want to watch the news tomorrow," Agent Reeves said as I was leaving. "The prosecutor is announcing formal charges. Michael Torres is going to trial." The trial began 3 months later. I wasn't required to attend. My testimony had been given during depositions, but I went anyway, sitting in the back of the courtroom under the harsh fluorescent lights. Michael's defense team was impressive, a lineup of expensive attorneys in tailored suits who objected to everything and spoke in confident legal jargon. Michael himself sat at the defense table looking calm, almost bored, as if this were a minor inconvenience rather than a federal trial that could end with him in prison. The prosecution laid out their case methodically. The offshore accounts, the shell companies, the forged signatures and stolen identities. My name came up repeatedly, but this time as a victim, not a perpetrator. One of Michael's attorneys stood during his opening statement and tried to paint me as unstable, vengeful, a disgruntled employee who'd fabricated evidence after being legitimately fired for incompetence. "Ms. Hart had access to company systems," he argued. "She had the knowledge and opportunity to create these accounts herself, then frame Mr. Torres when she was caught." I sat quietly, letting him speak. Then the prosecution played the recording, my voice steady and controlled, Michael's voice smooth and threatening. "Be careful what stories you tell, Olivia. They might start to sound believable." The jury shifted in their seats, some leaning forward to hear better. Michael's lawyer tried to argue the recording was taken out of context, but the damage was done. Why would an innocent man warn someone about telling stories unless those stories threatened to expose the truth? The trial continued for weeks. Financial experts testified. Devon took the stand and explained how he'd recovered deleted files showing transactions after my termination. The defense's case crumbled piece by piece, exposed as the elaborate lie it had always been. The most damaging evidence came from forensic accountants who'd analyzed the seized records. They presented a detailed timeline showing how Michael had systematically stolen from Tech Vision Solutions over a 5-year period, moving money through increasingly complex networks of offshore accounts. And at the center of that network were shell companies registered in my name. The prosecutor showed the jury documentation I'd found months earlier, accounts opened using my social security number, my birth date, my address. But the IP addresses told a different story. Every account had been created from computers in Tech Vision's executive suite during hours when I was provably elsewhere. Security logs showed I was working from the main office floor while the accounts were being opened upstairs. My security badge swipes, email activity, and even surveillance footage placed me in a different location during each registration. Mr. Torres had exclusive access to employee personal information through his position as CEO, the prosecutor explained. He selected Ms. Hart because she was thorough, trusted, and unlikely to be suspected. He used her credentials to create his infrastructure, then framed her when the scheme needed a scapegoat. Michael's attorneys fought hard, calling character witnesses who testified to his philanthropic work and business achievements, but none of it could overcome the financial evidence. The prosecutor's final piece of evidence was the frozen offshore accounts. Accounts registered under variations of my name, but controlled entirely by Michael, containing over $4 million stolen from company funds. The defense had no response. You can't argue with account numbers and transaction records. The trial moved to closing statements, then jury deliberation. I sat in the hallway outside the courtroom, unable to leave but unable to watch, while 12 strangers decided whether my name would finally be cleared or forever associated with crimes I didn't commit. The jury deliberated for 2 days. I spent that time in a strange limbo, unable to focus on anything but the trial's outcome. On the second afternoon, word came that they'd reached a verdict. The courtroom filled quickly. I took my seat in the back, my heart pounding so hard I felt dizzy. The jury filed in, their faces carefully neutral. The judge asked if they'd reached a unanimous verdict. "We have, Your Honor." Michael stood with his attorneys, his expression finally showing cracks, fear, anger, disbelief that this was actually happening to him. The jury foreman read the verdict. "On the charge of money laundering, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of wire fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of identity theft, we find the defendant guilty." Guilty on all 17 counts. Michael's face went pale. His attorneys immediately began talking about appeals. But the verdict was read, and nothing could change it. I sat in the back of the courtroom, not celebrating, not crying, just breathing, just existing in a moment where the truth had finally, officially been recognized. The judge set sentencing for 6 weeks later and denied bail, citing flight risk given Michael's access to offshore funds. Federal marshals escorted him out of the courtroom. As he passed my row, our eyes met briefly. His expression was pure disbelief that I'd won. That the quiet analyst he'd used and discarded had somehow brought down his entire empire without screaming, without public rage, without the dramatic confrontation he might have anticipated. I whispered to myself, so quietly no one else could hear, "You framed the wrong woman." The courtroom emptied. I sat alone for a few minutes more, letting the reality sink in. It was over. Not perfectly. Not completely. My reputation was still damaged. My career was still in ruins, but I was free. Vindicated, no longer carrying the weight of false accusations. The aftermath of the trial moved quickly. Tech Vision Solutions stock crashed within hours of the verdict. The board of directors held emergency meetings, and within a week, half of them had resigned. The company that Michael had built, at least the public version of it, was crumbling. My former colleagues started reaching out. Tentative emails at first, testing whether I'd respond. "I'm so sorry. I should have believed you." I was scared for my own job. I read each one carefully, but only responded to a few. The ones who'd actively participated in my public humiliation got nothing. But the ones who'd stayed silent out of fear, rather than malice, deserved at least acknowledgement of their apologies. The most surprising contact came from the HR director who'd escorted me out during my termination. She sent a formal letter, typed on company letterhead, admitting she'd been pressured by Michael to expedite my firing without proper investigation. "I falsified internal reports," she confessed in writing. "I documented non-existent complaints and fabricated evidence of policy violations to justify immediate termination. I'm cooperating with investigators and accepting responsibility for my actions." She was now under investigation herself, facing potential charges for her role in the cover-up. I felt no satisfaction in her downfall, just tired recognition that Michael's corruption had extended far beyond simple embezzlement. Meanwhile, federal authorities worked to recover the stolen money. The offshore accounts were frozen, their contents being seized to repay Tech Vision Solutions and compensate victims. My name was officially removed from all account documents, replaced with Michael's as the true owner. The process of clearing my credit report and financial records would take months, but at least it was beginning. Devon called regularly, updating me on the chaos at work. "They're bringing in a completely new executive team. Everyone who worked closely with Michael is either fired or under investigation. The whole company is being restructured." "How are you doing?" I asked. Honestly, relieved. That recording I made probably saved my career. They know I helped expose him. The media storm that followed the verdict was intense but brief. Reporters wanted interviews, talk shows called offering appearances, and true crime podcasts reached out asking me to tell my story in detail. I declined everything. No interviews, no dramatic tell-all appearances, no attempts to capitalize on my nightmare for public attention. One journalist was persistent, reaching out multiple times through various channels. Finally, I replied with a short email. I appreciate your interest, but I'm choosing peace over publicity. My story speaks for itself through the court records. I'd prefer to rebuild my life quietly. She respected that and published a respectful piece titled, "The Analyst Who Outsmarted Her CEO, How Quiet Persistence Brought Down a Corporate Fraud." It was fair, factual, and didn't sensationalize. The article mentioned that I'd declined interviews, preferring to focus on recovery rather than revenge. That detail, my refusal to engage in public spectacle, seemed to resonate with people more than dramatic interviews might have. The narrative shifted from disgraced analyst to whistleblower who valued truth over attention. My inbox filled with messages from strangers offering encouragement, from other fraud victims finding hope in my story, and from people who simply respected my choice to rebuild rather than capitalize. One message stood out, from a young financial analyst at another company. "Your case made me report irregularities I noticed at my firm. They investigated and found a similar scheme. You saved multiple people by standing up. Thank you." That message meant more than any interview appearance ever could. 3 months after the trial, Devin visited my apartment carrying an envelope. "This came to the office addressed to you. They forwarded it to me since you obviously don't work there anymore." Inside was a letter from the FBI's Victim Services Division. They were offering financial restitution, a portion of the recovered funds to compensate for my legal costs, lost wages, and emotional distress. The amount was substantial. Not enough to erase what had happened, but enough to rebuild. The restitution letter sat on my kitchen table for 2 days before I could bring myself to read it completely. It wasn't just about money, though that mattered, but about official recognition that I'd been wronged, that my suffering had been real and documented and worthy of compensation. The letter detailed how the FBI had traced the stolen funds through the offshore network Michael had created using my identity. They'd recovered approximately $3.8 million of the $4.2 million he'd stolen, with the remainder lost to fees, transfers, and accounts that couldn't be recovered. As a victim of identity theft and the primary whistleblower in the case, I was entitled to compensation for lost wages during unemployment, legal consultation fees, even though I'd mostly represented myself, emotional distress, and reputational damage. The total came to $175,000. I sat staring at the number, trying to process what it meant. Not justice, money couldn't buy that, but acknowledgement, validation, a tangible recognition that my quiet persistence had mattered. The letter also noted that my cooperation had helped recover millions and prevent ongoing fraud. "Your documentation and investigative work," it read, "proved essential to building a prosecutable case. Your courage in coming forward, despite professional and personal risk, prevented further victimization and helped dismantle a sophisticated fraud operation." I realized then that I wasn't crying from sadness anymore, but from relief. Relief that someone official, someone with authority, had said clearly, "You were right. You were brave. You mattered." A week later, news broke that Michael had taken a plea deal during the sentencing phase. Rather than face maximum penalties on all counts, he'd agreed to cooperate with prosecutors investigating his accomplices. The plea deal included nomming the board members who'd helped him cover financial discrepancies and the accountants who'd falsified records. His empire was taking others down with it. Devin sent me a screenshot of the headline. "Convicted CEO names accomplices in plea agreement. Multiple executives face new charges." I read it once, then closed my phone. Michael's downfall was complete, but it wasn't my focus anymore. I was already looking forward, not back at the wreckage he'd created. The final hearing happened on a cold morning in November. Sentencing day. I attended, sitting in the same back row I'd occupied during the trial. Michael looked different now, thinner, grayer, diminished in his prison jumpsuit. The expensive suits and confident posture were gone, replaced by someone who looked smaller than I remembered. The judge reviewed the case extensively before announcing the sentence. "Mr. Torres, you betrayed the trust of your employees, your company, and your investors. You systematically stole millions of dollars and attempted to destroy an innocent woman's life to cover your crimes. You showed no remorse until faced with overwhelming evidence, and even then, your cooperation came only to reduce your own punishment." She paused, looking at him directly. "I'm sentencing you to 12 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised release. You'll pay full restitution to Tech Vision Solutions and additional penalties to the victims of your identity theft. You're permanently barred from serving as an officer or director of any public company." 12 years. Michael's attorneys had argued for leniency, but the judge had been unmoved. He stood as the marshals approached, and for a brief moment, he turned and looked directly at me. Our eyes met across the courtroom. I saw disbelief still lingering there, mixed with something that might have been grudging respect. He'd underestimated me completely. I thought I'd crumble under pressure, take a plea deal, disappear quietly. Instead, I'd systematically documented his crimes and brought him down without ever raising my voice. I didn't smile, didn't gloat, just met his gaze steadily until he looked away. As the marshals let him out, I whispered one last thing to myself. "You framed the wrong woman." Then I stood and walked out of the courthouse, feeling the weight of 6 months of investigation, fear, and fighting finally lift from my shoulders. Outside, the winter sun was bright and cold. I took a deep breath of free air and started walking toward my future. 6 months after Michael's sentencing, I started consulting. Not for a big firm, I'd had enough of corporate politics to last a lifetime, but independently, working with small companies that needed ethical financial guidance. My first client was a startup that had been approached by investors with questionable backgrounds. They wanted someone who could review financial proposals and identify red flags. I found 3 major concerns in their first offer, saving them from what would have become a disastrous partnership. Word spread through professional networks. "There's this analyst who exposed that huge fraud case. She knows how to spot financial manipulation." My second client was a nonprofit that suspected their treasurer of misappropriating funds. Within 2 weeks, I documented enough evidence for them to file a police report. The treasurer confessed before charges were even filed. My third client was particularly meaningful, a woman-owned business that wanted to establish transparent financial systems from the ground up. "I want to make sure nobody can ever accuse me of what happened to you," the owner told me. "I want everything documented so clearly that fraud would be impossible." We built a system with multiple verification points, transparent reporting, and automated alerts for unusual transactions. It became my model for future clients. Devin joined me after 6 months, leaving Tech Vision to become my first official employee. "I learned more investigating fraud with you than I did in 2 years of regular analysis," he said. "I want to be part of what you're building." Together, we created Whitfield Ethics Consulting, specializing in fraud prevention and financial transparency. One afternoon, Agent Reeves stopped by my small office. He'd been promoted after the successful prosecution of Michael's case and was now heading a white-collar crime unit. "I wanted to thank you personally," he said. "That case became a model for how we investigate corporate fraud. Your documentation, your patience, your willingness to wait for the right moment, it's being taught at the academy now." He handed me his card. "If you ever need anything, or if you come across something that needs federal attention, call me directly." After he left, I stood at my office window looking out over the city that had watched my public humiliation. The same streets I'd walked while everyone believed I was a criminal. But I was still here, still standing, still building something honest and meaningful from the ruins of what Michael had tried to destroy. A year after my vindication, I signed the lease on a proper office space. Not huge, but professional, with large windows overlooking the downtown skyline. I furnished it simply: good desk, comfortable chairs, technology that worked. And on that desk, I placed one photograph in a simple black frame. Not of my victory, not of the trial or the headlines, but of my old employee badge from Tech Vision Solutions. The one stamped TERMNATED in red letters. Devin asked about it once. "Why keep that? Why not throw it away and forget?" "Because it reminds me," I said. "Reminds me that I survived the worst thing I could imagine. That being terminated, accused, and publicly humiliated didn't break me. It just showed me I was stronger than I knew." The badge sat there as clients came and went. Some noticed it. Some asked about the story. I told them the basics, enough to explain my expertise in fraud detection, not enough to make it about revenge or drama. My business grew steadily. Small companies, medium-sized nonprofits, even a few corporate clients who wanted independent audits. I developed training programs about recognizing financial manipulation and protecting yourself from fraud. I spoke at a few business ethics conferences, always focusing on systems and prevention rather than personal narrative. The satisfaction I felt wasn't from watching Michael in prison or seeing Tech Vision Solutions struggle. It was from building something they couldn't touch, something honest and sustainable and entirely mine. They took everything from me, my job, my reputation, my sense of security, and I built something better from nothing. That same month, news broke that Tech Vision Solutions was filing for bankruptcy. The combination of stolen funds, legal fees, and complete loss of investor confidence had been too much to overcome. The company that had fired me no longer existed. I read the headline once, then closed the browser. Their ending wasn't my focus anymore. I had consulting contracts to review, clients to meet, a business to run. Devin stuck his head into my office. "We just got a new inquiry. Tech startup, Series A funding, wants us to review their financial controls before going to investors." "Perfect. Schedule the initial meeting." As he left, I looked at my terminated badge one more time. Then I picked up my phone and started preparing for the consultation, moving forward into a future I'd built myself. I'm sitting in my office now, 2 years after the day Michael Tors escorted me out of Tech Vision Solutions. My business is thriving. Devin is training a second consultant we just hired. We have a waiting list of clients. But more than the professional success, I have something more valuable: peace. People often ask if I regret what happened, if I wish I'd never worked for Michael, never been framed, never gone through the nightmare of investigation and trial. The answer is complicated. I regret the pain. I regret the fear. I regret the months of wondering if I'd spend the rest of my life labeled as a criminal. But I don't regret the person I became through surviving it. I learned that I'm stronger than I thought. That persistence matters more than power. That truth, though slower than lies, has its own unstoppable momentum. People think revenge means destruction, dramatic confrontations, public humiliation, watching your enemy suffer. But real revenge is walking away clean while they burn down their own empire. It's refusing to become what they accused you of being. It's building something honest from the wreckage they created. Michael Tors taught me many things during our years working together. He taught me financial analysis, corporate strategy, how to read complex systems. But the most important lesson he taught me, though he never intended it, was how to cover tracks. I just made sure mine led to freedom instead of fraud. My phone buzzes with a news notification. The headline reads, "Former Tech Vision CEO denied early parole, will serve full sentence." I read it once, then swipe it away. His story is over. Mine is just beginning. I close my laptop, sign a new client contract that Devin left on my desk, and stand up. Through my office window, the city sprawls out below me. The same city that watched me fall. The same streets where I walked while everyone believed the worst about me. But I'm still here. Still standing, still building. And that, I've learned, is the best revenge of all. I grab my coat and walk out into the afternoon sunlight, ready for whatever comes next. Because I've already survived the worst thing I could imagine. Everything else is just details.